is the Regional Director for Africa at the UN Development Programme, and she joins us live now. Ahunna, thank you so much for being with us. I do want to start with Sudan, because this is a country that has been through so much. It's been through so much in its quest for democracy. I mean, it's seen military dictatorships, it's seen coups, it's seen military rule, it's seen revolutions, it's seen countless demonstrations in which ordinary civilians and protesters have lost their lives. Even after this civil war ends, hopefully it will soon, but even after the civil war ends, what does Sudan's transition towards democracy even look like?
Well, this is exactly, thanks Ian for having me. This is exactly why we launched this facility with the African Union, because we are seeing that political transitions today are more and more complex because they're happening alongside many other transitions, economic transitions, environment transitions. We have the impact of climate change. We've had COVID. We have now the war in Ukraine. So countries are really severely stressed at the same time as they're trying to pursue political transitions. And so they're hugely complex, and therefore it's not just going to happen after elections that you have an automatic transition. You need to invest in a long-term way a lot of resources to make sure that the transitions themselves are inclusive. And that's the same for Sudan. You can't just leave it to the warlords and the political elite. We need to have the voices of citizens, women, men, and youth as part of constructing the new Sudan.
I mean, it's interesting because, it's not just, I named Sudan because obviously that is the focus, that's where everyone's eyes is on because of the civil war that's happening there. But it's not just Sudan. I mean, you're seeing one-man rule in places like Tunisia. You're seeing political anarchy in Libya. I think Mali has had, if I'm not mistaken, about 3 coups in the last sort of 10 to 15 years. There's also Chad as well. Idris Deby died a couple of years ago. His son took over, and the idea of civilian rule in Chad is proving to be more and more elusive. Whose job is it to assist these nations in their transition, or encourage, I should say, these nations in their transition towards democracy? I mean, is it the role of the African Union, for example? Is it the role of the international community? I mean, who is responsible, if you will?
I think it's a collective responsibility, because if you take what's happening in the Sahel region, where we've seen these unconstitutional changes of government, they are grappling with insecurity, with the war against terrorism, violent extremism, and you have also climate change issues. These are all global issues, and therefore I think it needs global action for these countries to be accompanied to transition smoothly to a constitutional order. So it is the role of the international community, it is the role of regional actors, and that's why this Africa facility to support inclusive transitions, which we're calling AFSIT, was launched just recently in Nairobi with the African Union and the UN Development Programme, because we want to mobilize collective action to accompany these complex transitions, whether it's in Chad, in Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Sudan, or in Guinea, indeed. But also, we have increasingly a number of countries that actually, they're not going through coups, but they have manipulations in constitutions that actually raise a lot of insecurity and public outcry. So transitions are quite vulnerable to violence these days. And so we need a predictable facility that is also flexible, can adapt to the context, because every context is different. And the role that we're playing as the UN Development Programme alongside the African Union is to also to use our convening power to bring actors together so we're all pulling in the same direction. Because sometimes if there isn't convergence of interest to mobilize for a successful transition, what you could have is interference that actually delays.
You know, I'm so glad you said that. I'm so glad you said that, because it's not just about authoritarianism. It's much more complex. I mean, you've got countries like Senegal, for example. That is a democracy, but Macky Sall, the president of Senegal, was, we all thought, inching towards perhaps trying to seize a third term. He didn't, so that is somewhat of a bright spot. But you've got elections in places like Nigeria and Sierra Leone where people also question the results as well. I mean, Nigeria has been under civilian rule since 1999, but that doesn't mean that its elections are perfect. So just walk us through what can be done about that.
Well, you know, we just did another study which we called Soldiers and Citizens, the Pathways to Renewal of Democracy. I think the point here, and what we found, we interviewed about 8,000 people, and it's quite a large pool of individuals, of citizens, just to ask their views on these complex transitions and the unconstitutional change of government that we're seeing, but also the restlessness of citizens around what democracy has to offer or not. And what we're finding is you have a lot of enthusiasm and even warm reception of military rule at the beginning, but you know, it's more like a cry for democracy, for a renewal of democracy, not just that people want the military to come back into power, but they want democracy that works for them. And they want elections that are fair, that are transparent, and that are inclusive, where every citizen feels that their vote really counts, not sham elections that legitimize you know, existing ruling parties. And so we've seen that this is possible, actually, because we've seen quite a few smooth transitions of power. Zambia, Malawi, Kenya, Botswana. So it's possible for us to consolidate democracy on the continent. But we need to be predictable in the way we support transitions, even after elections, because usually the trouble starts after elections when you have contestations around the results of the elections. But for UNDP, for us, it's also about making sure before elections that we have institutions that actually deliver credible processes. That's why we support with technical assistance to make sure that those political institutions are positioned in ways that they can deliver fair, credible, transparent processes, political processes.
All right, Ahunna Eziakonwa, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.